there were two things I wanted to do. I mean, again, I really enjoy scary stories. I think movies have such an advantage over books for being scary, right? The music alone, what I wouldn't give for some background music, you know what I mean? If being able to put that in there, the camera angles, the shadows, the sense of being followed that you get with visuals is just incredible. But what a novel has that a movie can never is interiority, right? You get to really have that like deep dive into someone's head.
Tracy Sierra was born and raised in Colorado mountains. She is an attorney who currently lives in New England and is in an anti-colonial era home, complete with its own secret room. When not writing, she spends time with her husband and 2 children. Nightwatching is her debut novel.
Great. Yeah. Thanks for coming, everyone. This is really exciting just because my local library. Nightwatching is a home invasion novel, which is why I generally refer to myself as being from New England because I'm a little paranoid. But yeah, it's nice to be local and be doing an event here. I thought I'd start by just reading the first couple pages of the book. There was someone in the house. She stood in her son's dark bedroom. Through its open door and down the long hallway, the landing at the top of the steep kitchen stairs was lit by the dim glow of a plug-in nightlight. The light was there so the children would be able to see the stairs in their nighttime wanderings, to prevent them silently, helplessly falling as they padded from their rooms to their parents' bedroom overnight, seeking water or comfort or after a wet bed. The old house let the wind hiss through and crack its ribs. The sounds of it bracing against the storm, its staggered breathing, were familiar, but through it came noises that rooted her to the spot. Also familiar, but not at this time of night, not when she had been sure she was the only one awake. In the brief hush between the frozen gusts came the wheeze of weight on the stairs. You're imagining things. Her daughter lay asleep in the next room. Her son was already sleeping again a few steps away from her. For a moment, the hope it might be her husband lifted her. Stop it, that's impossible. But it could be her daughter sleepwalking again. They'd bolted the door of the girl's room that led to the old front stairs, a place too dangerous to let her sightlessly wander. But it was possible her daughter had gone out to the other door to her bedroom, the one they left unlocked despite the girl's sleepwalking and the danger of the kitchen stairs. The door they left open so she could use the bathroom at night, so that she understood she was still a big girl. They trusted her, and she should trust herself. That could explain it, and you wouldn't have heard the baby monitor go on. Her husband had mounted a motion-activated baby monitor outside their daughter's unlocked bedroom door after 3 nights of finding their little girl standing at their bedside, still and unwakeable. What can I say? Her husband had shrugged. Cameras are what I know. Click, fizz, beep. The monitor would spring to life in their bedroom, and their daughter would pass on the screen, blurry and bleached on the night vision, retinas giving an animal-like mirror flash. One of them, her, always her, would get up and intercept their daughter before the girl had a chance to accidentally hurt herself. She would guide her little girl back to bed, stroke the dark hair away from the open eyes, away from the slack mouth, sit with her daughter until she lay back on her pillow. That must be it, sleepwalking. And yet she couldn't make herself move, couldn't unfasten her eyes from the distant nightlight. A part of her remembered that the sound of her daughter on those stairs was simply different. A part of her acknowledged that in all her daughter's nighttime drifting, the little girl had never actually gone down the stairs, and the sounds were coming from the stairs. A twisted bit of nursery rhyme echoed through her head, one of the endlessly reread child things that now permeated her consciousness. If wishes were fishes, we've had some to fry. If wishes were fishes, we'd eat and not die. A low thump, a pause, a complete and instant switch in her thinking. He's hit his head. It sometimes happened to people who were unfamiliar with the eccentricities of the old house. Anyone taller than 6 feet had to tilt their head or duck to avoid the low cut of the ceiling at the turn of the stairs. There were thin scraping sounds as this person readjusted, recalculated, moved again. She saw fingers wrap the banister like white spider legs. So that is the opening. And just to kind of give an idea of where the story come from to start off, I first had the idea because I do live in an old house, an antique home built in the 1730s, and it is beautiful, but it can certainly be a little spooky at times, especially at night. And, you know, having young kids and being alone overnight a lot, my husband's a doctor, of course I had that paranoia, and I kind of realized that we all have that fear, right? That's such a universal fear that there's someone in your house. And I first started writing this during COVID lockdowns, and the house was very much the place of safety, but also very confining, right, for all of us during that period. So the idea of, you know, someone entering that safe space and the same sort of claustrophobic feelings I had, that I think we all also had around COVID and lockdowns, really read into the story a lot, as, you know, the mother has to find ways to protect her children, hide, etc. Yeah. And what else? Yeah. Oh, sure. That'd be great.
What made you choose this genre, like thriller versus?
Yeah, I mean, I've always loved scary stories. I think that as somebody who tends to be an anxious person a lot of the time, scary stories have always been sort of a safe way for me to kind of exercise fears, you know, and certainly writing the story helped me kind of poke at that idea and explore that and become less afraid of it. I also really just enjoy the way that thrillers, it's such a broad genre, you know, thrillers, crime, generally, you can have everything from super kind of heartwarming stories like cozy mysteries like your next guest, or but you can also have things that are very dark, twisty, scary, and you can do a lot of genre bending within thriller. And I really just love a fast-paced plot, and thrillers are very much plot driven, which I really love. You know, as an English major, I love classic literature and all of that stuff as well. But personally, I think, you know, you look at some of the greatest books of all time, and they are very plot driven. You know, you could say like Dostoevsky wrote thrillers, really, when it comes down to it. A lot of good twists and really fun plots.
I'm just wondering, at the audience, like, is that the type of books you usually read, or, you know?
Yeah, it's a really fun genre, and certainly I think one thing that I found really interesting in talking to people about the book is that obviously, as you saw, it starts off with a bang, right? Like it starts off very fast-paced, very much that you know immediately what the stakes are, even though you don't know the characters yet, and that is both kind of a blessing and a curse. I think it can be, people get very nervous that something's going to be too scary. And I always think it's really nice in the thriller genre, unlike horror where you never know where, you know, Stephen King might lead you, right? You never know what he's going to do to those poor people in his stories. But in the thriller genre, there's a lot of sort of, you're going to get your twists, your turns, but there's a different kind of, I don't know, agreement a lot of times between like author and reader about you know what you're going to get, and I think that's really quite nice in the genre.
Yeah, did the book just come out, or how long did it take you to write it? Or?
Well, so I started like I said, right in 2020 during lockdowns, and I ended up getting the book deal in 2022 and then revising. So it took 2.5 years between writing and revising, really, to kind of get it out into the world. And yeah, I knew, you know, from the beginning, kind of my process, I guess. I mean, it's always so interesting because people like knowing the process, but I've never met writers who have the same process as I've gone through this. But yeah, the process for me is always a very general outline so that I know I have an end before I start. I know that I can reach an end that I'm pretty satisfied with. and then I start writing. But if any better ideas come along, it's just, that's out the window and redone, because you always want to take advantage of kind of the better ideas, or the ones that you like or want to write the most, I think. There were two things I wanted to do. I mean, again, I really enjoy scary stories. I think movies have such an advantage over books for being scary, right? The music alone, you know, what I wouldn't give for some background music, you know what I mean? Being able to put that in there, the camera angles, the shadows, the sense of being followed that you get with visuals is just incredible. But what a novel has that a movie can never is interiority, right? You get to really have that like deep dive into someone's head. And I think when you are in a stress situation, an emergency situation, personally, I've never reacted the same way twice, and I've never reacted the way I thought I would or wanted to necessarily. Even times where I felt like, wow, I really rose to the occasion. I didn't necessarily think I had that much control a lot of the time if it was truly an emergency or scary situation. So for the heroine, it's very much about, she's a very, you find out she's a patent artist. She's a very logical human being who is very aware of sort of space and the way that things are related to each other in geography, et cetera. Just very logical person, very mathematical, not like me at all in that way. And she definitely is always running through every possibility kind of and trying to make these choices. And of course, you know, as many of us do, constantly second guessing herself, right? Was that the right thing? Did I miss that opportunity? Because that's part of what fear is, right? It's this, like, I did the wrong thing, you know, oh my gosh, I missed this chance, or, you know, not even being sure what you're doing is the right thing, because you don't know in a situation. You can never know. So yeah, I continue that kind of back and forth and her thinking, and she's actually, none of the characters are named in the story, and sometimes I wonder if I should tell people that, because most people don't notice as they read the book. It's only later when they oh yeah, and the main character, what was her name, you know, like that sort of thing that people realize, because it's a very small cast. And again, you know, you're talking about a mother with 2 small children trying to be quiet in a house. There's not a lot of using of names that would happen. You know, it'd be like mom, you know, this sort of thing. So it was very easy to do in that way. But hopefully the goal there was that you're in her head, you're by her side, so she kind of becomes you, right, as an unnamed person. But simultaneously, you know, you see a headline, you know, woman 45 in car crash or something, right? And there's a distance there, right? Like there's a distance there. And often the first thing I find myself doing is creating more distance, right? Saying, well, that wouldn't happen to me because, or I wouldn't be in a headline like that because, and there's just this human urge to always kind of convince yourself that bad things won't happen to you, because, you know, the idea that bad things can happen to good people is truly terrifying, right? And I think the story plays with that a lot. Like, what do you think of her second guessing herself? Do you feel that distance? Do you feel a closeness? Do you identify? Do you not? Do you think she makes the right choices? And why or why not? You know, and are you maybe a little more judgmental because she is a mother in this situation? So she's not just making choices for herself, but for her children as well.
Do you want to talk about her disability, or would that give anything away?
Oh, I don't think it does. Yeah, she has vitiligo, which is she has it's when you have sort of like white patches on your skin, and for her, it's made her, I would say, an incredibly observant person of the world around her, and also very aware of how people see her, because she does stand out in that way, and people have questions, sometimes rude, that they make and ask, and it's also just how the world perceives you does change based on your appearance. I think that's doubly true when you're a woman. And I wanted to explore that a little bit. I do not have vitiligo, but I was definitely inspired to do that because I have had a lot of skin issues in the past. And even things like going into a job interview, with like an eye patch versus not, the different response and the way you're perceived and the way people react is kind of remarkable. And I think to kind of ignore that and the emphasis that we put on appearance is, I wanted to kind of explore that a little bit in the book as well. For me, the most editorial work I did was actually with my agent. And she is fantastic. And she has just a really great eye for, I guess, just things that have, putting a lot of stakes in place and things that have a lot of emotional resonance. And the biggest thing I did with her was rework the ending, and I ended up being super happy with the ending rework the ending versus what I had originally, which was a much, I guess you could say, quieter thing. With the editors, there was a lot of, I would say, restructuring, which I think was very much to the book's benefit, because you do get to know the main character via a lot of flashbacks to her past and things she's gone through. And the timing of those is rough because the story, as you heard when I started the reading, is very much you're in that house with her and worried for her. And to take folks out of that can be frustrating for them, I think. Yeah. So to remove it, so the timing of those, they really wanted to get right, and I really appreciated that suggestion. I think I was very lucky with my editorial team. I had an editor in the UK and an editor in the US because the book sold simultaneously to both places, both to the same house, and they work a lot together and have a lot of authors kind of across the Atlantic, so they both did edit simultaneously, and that was really great because not a lot of folks get that. A lot of times, having gotten to know other debuts especially, you get one set of edits, another set of edits, another set of edits, and you have to kind of take everyone's input. But I would say that the editorial comments, they were always really open when I said, well, I don't want to change that, and here's why. And I truly think books are probably so much more like that than, say, film, TV, etc. Because other sort of storytelling mediums, you have huge teams weighing in, and the commercial aspect, not that books aren't a business, but I think there is still this idea that books are a form of art and you want the editorial voice of the writer and things like that, whereas, a screenwriter may not recognize something they write from first draft to movie, So I think in Bookland it's a little bit kinder to writers than a lot of other types of media. It's been optioned, so that's exciting. It was optioned in fall of 2022, and then of course everything was put on hold for the writer's strike and all of that. But we'll see. I would say I did try to make it kind of a very visual experience, just because I think that kind of stimulates the imagination a lot. And we'll see. Such a small percentage of things. I'm trying to be realistic and not get too excited, because such a small percentage of books make it into an actual movie. I've learned some things along the way of the option process, and as they've kind of proceeded through these steps, and it's what a strange and bizarre business movie making is, truly. There's just a million off ramps where things can go awry, for sure.
What about audiobook? Do you think there'll be an audiobook?
There is an audiobook, yes, which is, man, those folks are talented. I don't know if you guys like audiobooks. I'm a huge audio fan. And they sent me auditions of 3 different women, and I was so excited because, again, I love audiobooks, and The first woman, the passage I just read was sort of the passage that was the tryout piece. And she sounded as though she was reading a romantic comedy. I thought, this doesn't seem quite right. And then the second woman, I recognized her voice immediately because she is the narrator for a bunch of audiobooks I've listened to. But I also know that I don't love those audiobooks because her voice is just not one that I enjoy, even though clearly plenty of people do. She narrates some really dynamite authors. And then, I'm all nervous hitting number 3, and it was like the 3 Little Bears. It was just right. I have never replied to an email so fast. Number three. Don't choose those other 2, please. Number 3, that's the good one. That's the winner. So that was, and the audiobook, it's been really bizarre to hear someone else read, especially because, you saw how I alternated between her internal voice. And it's hard to do that. I mean, I certainly struggle with it reading aloud, and she just nails it. I'm very impressed by people who can do these things. But she did a great job. Yeah, you should get it at the library. It kind of reminded me of like the original poster of The Shining. I don't know if you remember that one, but there's the face behind the letters kind of. In the house at the bottom. They came up with absolutely all of it. The only thing I was really picky about was the house, because I realized people outside of New England don't really know what the classic early 1700s center chimney colonial looks like. The best thing you can say to them is Salem, and then they kind of get an idea. Or sometimes, Hocus Pocus or something like that, and they'll be like, oh, okay, one of those type of houses, and then they know what you're talking about. But they, so the initial house they had, I said, that's very clearly a 1920s farmhouse. They switched it out. I was like, that's a Vermont like cabin with the sideways window. That doesn't work. And finally, they got the house. That was the one thing that I kind of had input into. But they did. I mean, it's really fun seeing the. I do too, and the spine is kind of neat with the color change, and I truly know nothing about graphic design, but I know when I don't like something, and I like the cover, yeah.
And what about your house has a secret passage?
Yes, so I don't think it spoils it too much because it says it on the back of the book, but my house, like a lot of old houses, I don't know if you've ever taken old house tours or if any of you live in an old house, they have secret spaces essentially, and around our center chimney is essentially a crawl space, right? And that's probably very unglamorously there to maintain the fireplace, and I'm sure has been torn out and restored many times over the centuries. But the house in the novel has a similar secret room, and this is where they hide from the intruder. And so if you go on my social media, you can see a tour of our own secret room. And I just really love the idea of the secret room too, because again, the house in the novel is kind of its own character. And writing during COVID and these ideas of home and myself, that was the first, I was there full time with my kids, cooking 3 meals a day, and definitely sort of started thinking more about the home as a woman's traditional sphere, but again, as with COVID, claustrophobic space for women historically as well. And the secret room becomes kind of the embodiment of that, right? Like safe, but very claustrophobic, confining. There's really no way out. So it was definitely a huge inspiration for, as I was thinking, well, if this ever happened to me, what would I do, right? And thinking about my own space, which is so, I think, unique to the world, not unique to New England, but certainly regional. My daughter wrote her own version of the book, which at first got me really nervous, but then it's about like a unicorn frolicking in a field, it's fine overnight. It's great. So they've just been really supportive and just really sweet through the whole process. And it's interesting because, living in an old house, people always have opinion. Oh, aren't your kids scared? Don't they think it's spooky? No, my kids, it's their home. It's totally normal to them, and it's not scary at all to them. So yeah, but no, they're not allowed to read the book. too scary for them. The agent process was very, very difficult. Yeah. So this book I started writing during COVID. I had another novel that I put in a drawer for now that was honestly, I will turn back to it, I think, because I just loved the idea, but it was certainly a learning experience. I think for most writers have, even if they don't have kind of a completed novel that they've shelved, they have many false starts and projects and things that get so far and then get put aside and then get picked up again and then, this kind of thing. And so for that book, I went out to agents and got a lot of rejections. And that is the norm. Finding the agent is brutal. I'm not gonna lie, it's very difficult. There's no shortcut around it unless you're a celebrity, frankly. You are really just cold emailing someone your work, and with a cover letter similar as you would do to a job, only kind of summarizing, almost like you would on the back flap of your book, and hoping that that's enough to get them to read whatever pages they ask for on their website, so the first 10 pages or whatever, hoping they ask for more. And yeah, it's really tough because they can't represent that many people, and they have to really fall in love with the book. And because so many people were writing during COVID, it's gotten extremely competitive. It's always been competitive, don't get me wrong. I feel a lot of the time like I won the lottery, frankly. And yeah, so they really are looking for extraordinarily polished work. It's very, very difficult to find the agent. I took years to find the agent, and I got my book deal within 3 weeks after finding the agent. So for me, it was like wow, this whole book deal part isn't so bad. That's not true for everyone, but plenty of people find an agent right away and then can't sell a book and have the opposite experience. It's a very competitive and difficult process that involves a lot of good luck and timing. Yeah.
Now that you have an agent, will they represent you for the next book?
Yes, she'll represent me for the next book. It's sort of like a job, really. So we could fire each other at any time. You give notice. But for the way it works for all agents, all legitimate agents, there are a lot of kind of swindlers out there, I've learned. All legitimate agents, they will get a percentage of your advance for a book. So each new book is a new thing, and that's how they're compensated, sort of, like on commission, like when I worked at my parents' shoe store, essentially. Yeah.
And the agent works for the publisher?
Nope, she works for me. She sells it, yeah. Yeah, I could, for the next book, change to I have a one book deal. So for the next book, I could switch it up. I could put it out. They have an option, so they get first look. This is pretty common, for new writers. Though a lot of people do 2-book deals. There's advantages and disadvantages to each, as you can imagine, and it's always kind of a roll of the dice. So my next book is totally different. It's a survival thriller about a 12-year-old boy and his father going into the backcountry of Colorado. I'm from Colorado, for a retreat for his father's business, the father-son retreat. And, it's very much about outdoor survival, family dynamics, and, the wilderness, etc. So quite a bit different, but I think, one of the themes I really enjoy in scary stories generally is that they kind of allow us to explore social problems on a very sort of small human scale. And, Nightwatching does that. Hopefully this next one does that too, but it's almost finished. Till it has to go through, and then we'll see if it sells. So that's where it is now. You never know. Right now, I'm writing full time, which is much preferable to being an attorney, frankly. Yes. Yeah. An attorney has a lot of hours. I think it's important, just for human beings, not writers specifically, to read really widely. I love reading almost every genre. I will say that fantasy and sci-fi is not my favorite. That's the one that I really admire the world creation, but I find myself not as engaged personally, even though I love it on film. I don't know why. There's that divide. But one of my favorite things is historical fiction. I love Hilary Mantel, in recent memory. I just absolutely adore her Wolf Hall series. I've probably read that like 6 times. It's so good. And yeah, I would say I read a lot of nonfiction. It's helpful for looking at like psychology, looking at true crime, just for my genre specifically. Just because there's so much human psychology in every novel. That's what a lot of it is, right? Is character, hopefully, at the end of the day. And I'm a big fan of all the classics, pretty much. Some of them are very flawed, but I really enjoy. I reread Anna Karenina almost every year. I love Dostoevsky, super dark. So, big fan of the Russians. And yeah, I also, in this book, starts off with a quote from Nathaniel Hawthorne from Young Goodman Brown. And for this book, I did read sort of a lot of, New England writers to kind of get you in that space. And, especially the Puritans writing about the ideas of evil. And so much of this book explores how difficult it is for us as human beings to acknowledge that you might not be able to see evil on the surface of something, and how in denial we are about that, right? It's the classic, he seemed like such a good guy, right, that you hear on the news kind of a thing. And the Puritans delve deep into that stuff, so I really enjoy a lot of the writing by them and about them, exploring that. I love telling stories about the old house I live in on social media, because I've learned that, just like me, a lot of people love an old house. I love an old house. I love history, and those stories are really fun. And I'd say mildly viral for a story about the last homeowner from the same family owned it from the 1700s into the just before 1900, and the last owner of the home was found in a well, and had died, and it wasn't clear how he'd fallen in there. But in any case, that story around Norwell, which was in Scituate, gained sort of a legend, because the house was abandoned for about 30 years after he died, as the family and heirs tried to sort out who inherited what. And so the home was abandoned, so it was sort of like the haunted house in town, because this, curmudgeonly guy had been found in this well, and so it gave birth to this ghost story. And we've heard stories about, oh yeah, growing up, we used to dare each other to go into your house, things like that, So I told that ghost story online, and that story really took off. And I got contacted by the Daily Mail, asking me if my house was in fact haunted, and I said, no, Daily Mail, we've never seen a ghost, thinking they would never publish anything. And they did. They published an article like, thriller writer shares story of her old house, and they were clearly very disappointed I did not have ghost stories for them, because the first half of the article was about my post. The second half was talking to a ghost hunter about but ghosts exist. They may not exist in this house, but they exist. And I was joking, like, of all the things to get coverage, house exists, no ghost is like the headline I managed to obtain. But it was great, honestly, because, some like NPR heard it, and that's how All Things Considered called me to be interviewed there. And so even though they got more interested in the book, luckily, than the fact that there was no ghost. It's funny, social media now. I don't know. It's a new world for me. I really only joined it because of the book, and it's been a lot of fun. And yeah. I worked for a big firm in Boston, so the 90-hour work weeks, not so much. But I've always wanted to write, been a writer, and was always working on short stories. I had my first short story published this fall. It's free on Shenandoah Literary online if you are interested in in reading short stories. And that's an even more competitive genre, frankly, short stories. I swear it's the most difficult thing is poetry, right? Because it's short, everyone thinks they can write it, it's very, very difficult, and not a lot of readers of poetry. Very, very competitive. I really admire folks who make it in that world. But it's always been something I wanted to do. If you had asked me as a kid what I wanted to be when I grew up, I always said I wanted to be a writer, and so very exciting for me.
Dream come true.
It is a dream come true. It's which is both wonderful and extraordinarily stressful at the same time. Right. But it's pretty great because I understood the odds, I guess, and so I'm very grateful. Frankly, it's a tough business for sure. There's this feature in the Paris Review that is about author schedules, right? And it's been going on for since the Paris Review started in the 1920s. So you look at it and it's like Hemingway rolls out of bed at 5 a.m. and stands in front of his computer writing on a single long piece of paper, eating oranges from his garden, and then he goes and has lunch and he's done for the day, right? And then they profile these huge people, and they all have these very eccentric sort of schedules and routines and surroundings and everything else. And I got asked that question in one of these first things, and I was like, well, my schedule is I write around the children. that's I think the fact of life. And I think if I could give any advice to other people who want to write, it would be that you're doing it on spec, right? There's no guarantee it'll ever see the light of day. So first of all, you have to just kind of enjoy it for yourself and want to do it for yourself somewhat. And second of all, getting bogged down in scheduling and surroundings, and maybe like Michelangelo, I can wake up in the middle of the night and do a few hours work and then go back to sleep. You know what I mean? You hear all of these myths about how very creative people managed to do it. But for me, it was really about just deciding to and trying to fit it in around the edges, knowing that it's all on spec, which is rough. It is rough, but that's how you kind of have to make it work, and which is as best you can. And it means it takes every debut I've met, well, not every, but a lot of people, it's taken them a long time to write a first book because of that. And I don't think people discuss that, but that's the reality. That's the reality. For my outlining and brainstorming, I have to do stuff by hand. I can't do it on a computer because it just vanishes, right? But when I'm actually writing the book, I always do it on screen because I'm constantly, my process I would not recommend, but I write something and then I rewrite it, and then I write something more and then I go back to the beginning of that and rewrite it. So it's a kind of constant revision, which makes it imperative to have the computer. I'd be in trouble if I had to handwrite. I think it would take me an extra year to get through if I had to handwrite a book itself. Yeah, I think she ended up being different than me in most ways. I think her sort of feelings of imposter syndrome and such are definitely mine as well. But, thinking of someone who would, be in this situation, people said, well, if this, now do you feel better prepared if something like this were to happen to you? And I say, oh, no, now I just understand I'd be doomed, because I had to make this person who was, very competent, logical, not that she doesn't have a fear response, she absolutely does. She thinks she's always second guessing herself. But I certainly see her as someone who can deal with these things, adeptly. And I think a lot of times writers try to create characters that are almost like their fantasy versions of filling in their own gaps, if that makes sense. I'm terrible at three-dimensional visualization. Sewing a pillow, that's difficult for me, and that is a huge asset for her. Some skill she has, something that serves her very well in the book, just being able to kind of understand where everything is and make plans and that kind of thing. So I think each of the characters, even some of the villainous ones, I ended up having some sort of sympathy for, because you know how you always see actors interviewed and they're like, well, you have to get into their brain, you have to have sympathy for them or else you can't play them. I always thought that was nonsense, but it's true. It actually is true. It makes sense to me now. I see that. I would definitely set something in New England again. I mean, it's really, I think about all the time just how culturally impactful New England is, right? And, you know, the Boston area, I think especially, it's not a big city, but it's just, even growing up in Colorado, you heard about it constantly, just because of all the history in New England, you know, all the universities, right? All these movies set at Harvard and it, you know, all these universities in town. And I think even just something as simple as like the Vermont colors, like everyone in the country knows about these things. And that is not true of where I'm from in the same way, you know. It does not have the same kind of cultural impact. And I think setting something in New England, you already have this like great kind of background and atmosphere that people, even if they've never been here, know what it is. I mean, even before I had been here, I kind of knew what it was, right? You know, just because of the history and everything. So I would absolutely set something here again, especially writing scary stories. It's where else are you going to set it, you know? I mean, come on, you got New England, you might as well. Though I have learned that people in the UK don't really know what New England is. Yeah, a lot of them are like, oh, I vaguely think of witches and fall. And I was like, that's enough. That's good. Okay, as long as you know that. But I figured it would be sort of like somebody asking me where the Cotswolds are on a map. I mean, I know that's a thing, but probably couldn't really point that out. You know what I mean, as far as a country's region. So I forgive them. But I think it being called New England, too, they're like,
Yeah.
I don't know about that. A little insulted, yeah. You know, some folks can put out a book a year. I'm definitely not one of those people. But I started writing this book soon after I got my deal for Nightwatching, which was in 2022. So I've been working on it now for, 2 years. So I'm getting it to my agent. We're gonna do a revision together and then hopefully sell it. We'll see. Fingers crossed. Yeah. I think books in the book industry gives you really creative leeway, and certainly social media is important. It's been helpful for me personally. For some people, it's immensely helpful, especially YA, fantasy, romance. Those people absolutely kill it on socials. They do so well. But I think it's been a great way for me to just really naturally discuss the book without having to push the book, because anything you see on socials that's selling something, just anything, anywhere now, we're always being sold stuff on a screen, and so you just scroll on by, So it's been a really natural way for me to kind of connect with folks. And again, I think because New England has kind of these scary undertones and sort of cultural lore, it's been really helpful. But yeah, I would definitely kind of try, I think, to pivot my focus if I'm trying to promote the other book. But really, I think it's been really lovely for connecting with readers, other authors, things like that. And I don't think I'm ever one of these writers that's going to have 1 million followers. Again, I think thriller isn't as much like that, but it is certainly nice to kind of carve out your own space and be able to have a place to talk about the book. I know there's a lot wrong with social media, but it is nice as an author to be able to have your own voice that you can kind of broadcast. That's very new still, and it's great. Even the publishers, frankly, I think they could, some are super social savvy, again, especially in YA, because social skews so young that young adult readers really flock to things like TikTok. But for my imprint, they're just constantly like, wow, this social media thing is, this is kind of good for you. This is helping. Good work. They're totally kind of disconnected from it. The imprints have a social media manager who runs their own accounts and does their own promo, but that's very much, here's the next book, here's why you should buy it, very straightforward sort of marketing. So if you're not in the YA space or the romance or fantasy space, you're not going to much support there. So yeah, it's interesting. Strange new world for sure. Right now, the whole industry is utterly dominated by book clubs, utterly dominated. You are not ever going to get on a bestseller list if you are not already established, your Stephen Kings, your Danielle Steeles, or go viral on TikTok, which is like the lightning strike, your Rebecca Yarros or something, where everyone's reading your dragon school books, on TikTok, or you need a book club, and that's it. That's the golden ticket. That's it, really, for those lists, which is both wonderful and terrible. Like, it's really great because, frankly, these clubs have gotten people to read a lot more, and people love talking about books. They've discovered that they enjoy having a community. They've created local book clubs. So a lot of people will read beyond a book club selection for a given month, even. So I think it's really encouraged readership. Certainly, folks like Oprah have done so much to promote books, period, in the country. And like LitFic is just one, if she picks something, it's just incredible what it will do for a literary fiction author, which doesn't traditionally sell that well. With her on board, it's career maker. Reese Witherspoon, she chooses female authors exclusively, which is incredible. And, so there's different, and there's so many clubs now. Mindy Kaling now even has her own imprint that really focuses on writers of color, which is incredible because there's like a real lack of promotion of a lot of authors who are really good writers. And so you get so much wonderful, engagement, but at the same time, there's very little room for anything else to kind of, do what, say, like the Da Vinci Code, right, did 20 years ago, where there were ads and stuff, but it was a word of mouth book. You don't get that now, you don't get that kind of thing on a list level. But whatever, I guess socials are word of mouth now in their own way. It's just a different it's virality instead of, sort of grassroots word of mouth. Yeah. They send all the books to all the clubs, pretty much, seems like to me, yeah. Mm-hmm. They do tours for folks who have more than one book out, really, because for a debut, I think especially, it's one thing being local here, and my book's set in New England, and I know folks here, and there's so much people can kind of automatically connect with the setting and this kind of thing. Whereas if I were to travel to Arizona, it would be a much harder sell. And, frankly, travel is really expensive now too, so it's a cost-benefit thing. But really, they only send pretty established authors out. A lot of authors will choose to do their own tours as well because they want to or think it's worth it, and there are all kinds of different marketing strategies and things around that. But yeah, I've tried to do things around the area. I've tried to do a lot of virtual events, and I'm trying to plan things around sort of family travel and things like that, just to kind of be smart about it. And but it's it's not like the Murder, She Wrote days where she was always on book tour. It's not like that anymore. My publisher, my agent, we kind of came up with a list of people to contact. And that was the most surreal part, frankly, of this whole process. Because, some of the people who ended up blurbing, I've read for a really long time. And it's been one of the really special things is how these super established, super successful authors are still reading debuts and doing that for people. They aren't paid to do that. To read the whole book and say something about it's incredible. It's a really, before kind of having my book move forward, I really had no idea how supportive the author community is. Obviously not every author comments on every book or loves every book. You can't win art, but it's been really wonderful, and it certainly makes me want to pay it forward for other writers for sure. But yeah, that was extremely surreal. It's on Audible. If you have Spotify Premium, you get, I think, 15 hours of free streaming, and my book is only 10. And it's per month, so, even if you run out of time, you could start it next month. Yeah, so. Yeah. Great.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for coming.